Everyone, welcome to today's webinar, The Remote Access Paradox. This is looking at RealVNC's 2026 Trends Report. I'm your host, Nick Cavalancia. Glenn, you're joining me today. This is actually a very important topic. We're going to try to touch on both looking at industry data as well as RealVNC's 2026 Trends Report, just looking at the problem of remote access from a security perspective. And as you're going to see in some of the data that we found, again, both in the report and even just externally from other sources here, the idea of having remote access, whether it's externally facing, internal only, it doesn't matter. It's aiding, almost like to say aiding and abetting, aiding threat actors. Aiding and abetting is only comes when you actually been arrested by someone, but aiding threat actors in the activities that they're doing where they're trying to gain access to an organization, of course, with initial access, as well as move laterally within an organization. And so we really want to hone in on the challenges therein. And then this last note here, you can see right at the bottom here, why free is actually costing you more and your security teams are missing the risk here. So we're going to have a bit of a discussion today. I'm joined by two great speakers. First, I have Anthony Porter. Anthony is a senior security architect at CSA Cyber. Anthony, thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Nick. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Glad you're here. We also have Richard Petitt. He's head of sales at RealVNC. Richard, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, hi Nick, hi Anthony. Hope you're both well. It's my second appearance, so thanks for having me back.
Yep, glad you're here. Now, the reason why we have these two speakers, I think, is really kind of important for you, those of you in the audience. One is getting an actual sort of cybersecurity perspective, as well as I asked Richard to be on this specifically, not because he's going to try and sell you RealVNC throughout the entire webcast, but just looking at the perspective of, is this what RealVNC is hearing from prospective customers? Is the data align? Is the problem that we're seeing out in the industry, or is RealVNC hearing it? And then eventually we do want to discuss just very briefly at the end, what are they doing about it and what do they have to offer? But that'll be just right at the very end. Now, today's format is very much a discussion format. We do have, I think it's in addition to the 2 slides you've seen, I think there's 8 more slides and then something at the end with a QR code that you can go to find more information. And so it's not a lot of slides, but we do have something like 40 minutes, 45 minutes, I think, is so of discussion today. So we're going to cover the slides. I have a couple of questions for my other fellow panelists that I have here. And I even want those of you that are watching, if you have a question, a comment, an anecdote, a joke, whatever it is you want to share, stick that in the Q&A box or in the chat. I've got both open here in front of me. Happy to try and include those in if we can contextually throughout the discussion today. And of course, there will be some time at the very end for formal Q&A. So if we don't get to your question or your comment or whatever it is in the middle of our presentation today, we'll definitely try to make sure we hit it at the very end. The other reason I mentioned that this is a discussion is because if while we're having the discussion, you may not see the slides advancing because we're just talking about whatever it is that the topic is on the slide. So I want you all to be thinking about the slides as being visual indicators of what we're talking about, rather than expecting that every time we say something or talk about something ever so slightly different, that the slides are going to change. They may not. They may just still stay kind of static. Again, there's only about 8 or 9 slides besides the 2 you've already seen. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump in. As I mentioned at the beginning here, today's presentation is based off of this Remote Access Paradox 2026 Remote Access Trends Report that RealVNC has put out. Those of you that are watching are going to be sent a copy of this after the webinar. I'm not sure if it's today or within the next couple of days, but you'll be sent a copy of that, so you don't have to worry about trying to find it or download it. And what you can see over on the right, some of the demographics did get to almost 200 IT professionals, got everyone from those in the trenches all the way to those that are into security operations, even development engineering. These are people that are definitely in the work that every day of trying to make sure that remote access is both functional as well as, to varying degrees of success, secure. And the focus of it was just looking at the use of remote access, the risks therein, exposure from using tools like RDP. And by that, whenever we talk about RDP, we're talking about just the basic level of RDP that's built into Windows and leveraging that, as well as other open source tools. And then just try to identify some kind of hidden costs that go into play here. So with that, we're going to start by just talking about this idea of, as you can see here, just talking about the incident rates and looking at the uphill climb of incident rates based off of, if you look on the right-hand side here, for organizations that have had open source only, you see business grade commercial remote access tools, and then a mix of both therein. And the blue, the darker blue, if you will, or if anyone happens to be colorblind, the darker color, but the darker blue that's there is referencing when there's an incident at an organization. You can see that with organizations that have open source only, they have a high degree of incident rates, 65%. You can see it's still the same when it's mixed. It's even slightly higher with business grade commercial. And that may seem counterintuitive, but we're going to talk about security controls that need to be put in place. And in some cases, organizations that are responding to this don't consider something like, let's say, Microsoft's RDP. And we're not here to Microsoft bash, but just using something like RDP, which on its own by default isn't entirely secure. That's considered a business grade commercial solution, even though it's not paid for. I think in our case, we're kind of more thinking this as open source more than anything. You can see here that actually, I take that back. I think that particular chart might be backwards. It's 22% for of incidents. Oh, that's what it is. I'm sorry, I misread the chart. That bottom chart for business grade commercial should be backwards. It's 78% don't have incidents, 22% do have incidents. So with business grade commercial, it's far less. But you can kind of see the trend here as it's going with something that's purely open source, something that's free. Lots of risk there, less of using a mix and even less of using commercial. And Anthony, I think I'm going to kind of start with you here. Sorry, Richard, I'm going to start with you. I take that back. Obviously, RDP, open source type tools actually I found it to be almost dead just prior to COVID. It seemed like organizations, the trends where it was going down, less open source, less RDP, and then COVID happened, and suddenly the need for remote access exploded, and so organizations started leveraging tools and so on. My question is, has this use of open source solutions, has it increased over the last 5 years? Has it remained stagnant? Has it somewhat decreased, knowing that at the beginning it took a massive jump and spike right after 2020? What have you seen over the last 5 years?
Yeah, it's a fair question. So we've obviously there was a bit of rush back in 2020 to get tools in place while everyone was trying to run out the building to be able to work from home, and to also continue supporting users, whether they're in the building or working from home. So those open source tools and RDP as an example, because they were readily available, it's like, oh, okay, we've heard of that thing, we can just start using that because we don't pay for it. It's just available to us, and we've never had a huge need for it. Suddenly, within that 2-week period, it became very, very popular because those tools were ready and waiting and available to be used and relatively easy to be rolled out, right? So I think what we've seen in the last 5-6 years is that kind of event that happened back in 2020 put in place free solutions and RDP solutions and other products that have a free offering. But maybe the security hasn't kept up over that 6-year period, right, to keep up with what's actually changing in the industry and what we think we'll see this year as well. So we have, a number of customers that have been using those type of tools for a number of years. A new penetration test goes out in the company that year. Those tools get flagged. Like, what are you actually doing with those tools? Has it been updated? Has it been patched for a while? And suddenly you get these questions that they're not quite sure about what the answer is, and then it snowballs from there essentially, and things move on, and those attack vectors need to be closed off through whatever means they have within those tools they're already using, or they look at what alternatives might be available. So the area of open source and RDP, because they've been in place for a while and readily available, there's no separate licensing for these tools, right? You can just use it. But the point is about whether those security mechanisms have been able to keep up over time. And the report that we've done kind of highlights some areas of risk and what to look out for.
And Anthony, obviously, orgs are widely aware of the fact that RDP is not, I'm going to say it's not secure. That's not fair, but it doesn't have the level of security controls that, let's say, commercial remote access solutions that are focused on not just productivity, not just performance, but also security would have. Why do you think that we see this, this massive use of still open source solutions, despite the fact that you can see it's almost 2/3 of organizations? And this question, to be fair, wasn't written like, did this incident happen because of remote access? There's a correlation we're drawing that if you're using remote access, you can see they have a lot more incidents than those that aren't using open source tools. But why do you think orgs are still using open source remote access solutions today?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to something that Richard said. It's not necessarily the most interesting of all answers, but it's there, it's built in, it's ready to go. It's very much of a product of, oh, we'll secure it later. We're ready to go, as opposed to organizations maybe thinking it's safe or thinking it lacks risks. I think it's very much a case of we have it today and we can utilize it immediately, thus moving our business forward, as opposed to worrying about securing something, taking time, looking at the landscape, etc. And go back to what you just mentioned, it's not necessarily the protocol itself. So our RDP isn't inherently insecure. We're not saying it is. Like I said, we're not here to bash it. It's how the deployment pattern is done. It's the world that we have of not so much a internal network anymore. We don't have this kind of trusted perimeter now. We've got hybrid environments. We've got people on unmanaged devices. We've got cloud workloads. We've got all the things that we now live and breathe because it makes our life easier in other aspects of organizations and business. Those kind of assumptions from RDP will help us and make it easier. Falls down a little bit and it stops being as effective as it was maybe when it was launched, or when we had different types of network infrastructure or different types of organization set up.
I would tend to agree. The notion of let's get it deployed does fit the whole, it's my latest fire I have to put out today as an IT professional. But then also it's usually about functionality, which can be read like productivity, even though IT folks are like, I need this to be more productive for my user. They're not thinking that way, but they are thinking like, I need it to work, I need it to be functional, make the users productive. Can they remotely access another system? Yes, they can. Good, thumbs up. And then you're right, they will figure out the security later. I think, Richard, you even talked about, we suddenly have a penetration test and someone goes, you have lots and lots of holes for your remote access, you need to close that up, and then it becomes an issue. And that might be part of the reason, is it's just not a focus. We put out the fire and we've moved on. And Anthony, you mentioned risks, and I want to kind of go to the next slide here because I love when other people do my segues for me. And that is talking about why the free actually does create risk. And if those of you watching, if you look over on the right, there are organizations that were asked, basically, does it create more risk? And you can see there a total of 78% of organizations were actually cited as saying, to some degree, very much agreed with it, or mostly agree with it. The idea that it does create, that open source remote access does create more risk. And there's a list on the left here. And you see things like manual patching, the CVE tracking kind of comes into play if the particular solution in question or the underlying operating system and how, wherever that CV is applicable to, might cause exposure for the organization here. Things like custom scripts showing maybe there's a fragile security because you have to write something that's custom in order to secure a particular environment, a particular solution. And then also kind of keeping in mind that open source remote access tools may not have a massive amount of security in the same way that you would expect from commercial tools, where organizations like RealVNC or any other remote access provider are driving forward. How do we make this more secure? What's going on? What are the threat actors doing? How do we go ahead and thwart what they're doing with better security controls in our solution? You don't necessarily have that with open source here. And then you see things like missed updates, in case, even if there is an open source solution or something that has a security update, maybe you're not updating it, because it kind of goes back to what we all were saying earlier in the last slide. It's sort of a, we already said it, so we're going to forget it. We'll wait until there's an issue, and it's the next fire that we have to put out here. And Anthony, maybe I'll pose this question to you. Again, not an exhaustive list of risks that exist here and that are created from using free, but is anything here something you think is most pressing? Is there something else you'd like to add to this? How do you best augment this list and put it in context from a cybersecurity perspective?
Yeah, I think it's like you said, the list isn't exhaustive. There's not a huge amount I would add to it as a initial concern or worry, either for organizations or for businesses. I think the key parts are for people to remember, or for anyone that's using open source, and this applies to everything, not just RDP, of course, or remote protocols, but you're not just a user. You are now an integrator, you're an engineer, you are a SOC analyst, you are everything that's in between that your business does, but for that one particular part of the business. So less so of a, we can just use this and it's ready to go, more so of how do we now manage this product from the end to end. Adding on to that list, we've got kind of scope creep, we've got how we're going to manage identity hooks, I think that's the key part. We're seeing identity as that new perimeter in security. It's a very, very cheesy line, but it's one that I do quite like. It's very much there. And the open source solution is going to hand you that. It's going to say, yeah, plug it in, but it's not going to help you or lead you on that journey of how to implement that identity effectively. It's going to give you fragmented issues around your authentication, authorization. As soon as somebody is going to get access to that, that's going to be their big way in. And it's the configurations, like we said before, it's less so on the tool itself, but it's all the extra things that you now need to do because you are managing that product as if it was your whole organization from end to end.
Yeah, it feels like organizations, definitely in the case of remote access, have followed. There's sort of this pattern that we all do as technologists, which is we start with a technology, we think it's very cool for whatever reason we think it's very cool, and then we eventually try to figure out whether or not it meets the business needs or not. And that happens across the board, not just cybersecurity. You're laughing because I know you've seen it as well. It could be, even if we're talking about backups or any other kind of solution. But when it comes to security and remote access, specifically, I feel like organizations that are leveraging these open source tools have not taken the time to figure out what are our business requirements, not just from a remote access position, like, okay, what kind of refresh rate do we need? Or what's the minimum amount of bandwidth we can support because we have someone that's truly remote in the middle of somewhere that only has cell connection or whatever it is, but also go, what are our security requirements for leveraging a remote access solution here? And maybe Richard, I'll kind of throw that to you. Do you find when you're talking to customers that the discussion is very much around feature sets of a remote access solution and or kind of tied in with that? Do you hear them saying, well, our business requirements are, and we need to make sure that it does this for these reasons? And it sounds more business related than it is technical related. What do you experience there when you're talking to customers?
Yeah, it's easy to get mission creep at the start of a project. So you end up with a bag of ideas about what you might need in the next 6 to 12 months. And then, but that might not be the same for what you need in 3 years' time. So, the issues with open source and sometimes RDP is you start off with this tool for a specific project, and then you get another request to maybe support some mobile devices, or the help desk team is looking for a new tool, and you're like, okay, well, we use VNC or we use RDP or open source, whatever. And then you're kind of in this review period about, okay, what does everyone need? Because this was this for this specific project, and now we're looking at something a bit more global. And there's other sort of logistical, practical concerns as well. Like the number of times we speak to customers and they're like, well, we're looking to review options. Some guy 10 years ago put in open source VNC, and we just found out about it. It hasn't been touched for 10 years. We don't know how many devices it's on. We don't know if it's been patched. We don't know these things. So, when you get a new IT director that comes in, or someone in a leadership position, they go through a review of their tech stack. That often comes up, and then they go into a review period, work out what they need for the next 3 years, and that's the best time to make changes, right? So we could work a lot with companies in manufacturing, right? They have these equipment and processes that run for a long time. Any downtime is, can be devastating because they're running multi-million-pound processes, right? So they don't have time to swap stuff out. So, manufacturing as an industry, they got things pretty well locked down with their networks. Whether it's operational technology or processing on factory floor, those are highly, protected processes that are happening. So, a lot of it really is about what was the tool brought in for originally, and is it still serving that purpose 5-10 years later, or has the security landscape changed and there needs to be some adaptation?
Anthony, do you see kind of the same thing when you're talking to customers, when whether it applies specifically to remote access, which would be nice if we could talk about it from that perspective, but even just overall solutions, is cybersecurity, the state of cybersecurity, the organization's requirements around cybersecurity for a given solution, is that in the forefront? Or is that, do you have to go remind organizations, oh, what are you guys doing for remote access? And are you paying attention to your security controls? Or, what does that look like from your perspective?
Yeah, I think we're moving in the right direction. I think cybersecurity has been saying that now for probably since its inception, for 20 years when it became more mainstream. But we are definitely moving forward. The advancements of shift left and secure by design are really helping that. So we're having People like myself as a security architect involved really early doors in projects and in organizations in their evidence gathering and their functional requirements as well as their non-functional requirements. So security is being thought of now, more so than what it was before. But it's not the initial mechanism of what do we need. It's more of a, okay, we've decided we need to do this thing. How do we now secure it? But that is coming before solutions and before kind of vendors and implementation plans, which is good to see.
That's good. We're on the right track. So let's talk a little bit about organizations and those that have chosen, let's say, internet exposed access to, whether it's RDP or another solution, as well as using, of course, internal. There's a specific question, those of you watching, you can see over on the right-hand side. They were asked basically about RDP usage and talking about whether or not they had incidents or not. And you can see on the sort of left of that graphic on the right-hand side that a majority, 75% of organizations with internet exposed RDP had some form of incident, some form of breach, versus the much smaller those that didn't. And then even so, you have 48% using internal use of RDP still had incidents. So it's almost a half and half if they have it versus if they don't, because threat actors are going to leverage whatever they can use, even if it's something built in or it's something they have to install from a command and control server, they download off the web, whatever the case is there. But it does indicate here that RDP specifically, I mean, it's evident with the idea of internet exposed RDP. It's just not safe here. Anthony, does this data surprise you at all? Are you seeing remote access being regularly used in cyber attacks, as an initial attack vector? What are you seeing these days?
Yeah, not surprised in terms of the numbers at all. I think if you went out and surveyed them across separate to remote access, you're probably looking at 3 out of 4, 75% of organizations have suffered some type of cyber investigation or breach or incident. And remote desktop or remote access pivoting is a key paramount to that. As soon as an attacker's in, they've got their initial access point. They maybe are trying to do privilege escalation first, or that might come later, but that remote access pivot is quite key. Where can we go around in this environment? What can we get to? Who's left a database open? Who's left that data warehouse kind of accessible? Or what servers can we go over to now, especially with our new privilege? Or where can we get to and then escalate that privilege? So it's definitely a part of the process. I wouldn't say it's our primary attack vector. It's not saying we're seeing that people are coming in initially or kind of monitoring how remote desktop is being done, but it's certainly a way that attackers are maneuvering around. They're looking for different ways that they can do that. That might be RDP, it might be SSH into different servers, etc. But I think the key part there is the majority of organizations are suffering something. If you have not then secured ways that attackers can maneuver around, then that something suddenly gets bigger. So within that 75%, I'm sure the majority are fairly small incidents, I'd like to hope. But if you have an additional attack vector or additional paths that attackers are going to utilize, then it's going to get bigger and it's going to then be a lot more costly.
I just came up with a marketing slogan for like every cybersecurity company. Everyone's like, stop making it easy. It's just that simple. So on the note of just kind of what the industry is seeing, there is an organization called Coveware, and they're a ransomware response company. So they're the ones that go out on an organization's behalf that's been hit by a ransomware attack and negotiate with the threat group or the threat actor and so on, try to get the key back or lower the ransom and so on. And every quarter they put out a quarterly ransomware report. And this is specific to ransomware, but it just kind of paints a picture here. They always have this chart that says what are the initial attack vectors that are used. And they've by and large had 4 of them. And it's remote access compromise, phishing / social engineering, software vulnerabilities, and then internal. And by and large, since this thing started in 2020, it was always remote access compromise and phishing that were kind of tied for first place. Like they would just kind of go like this back and forth on the chart. So one would be higher than the next one, and they would just kind of flip around depending on the quarter. One of them would be on top, the other one would be second, and then they would flip flop some other quarters. And for one of the first quarters ever, I think, as I'm looking at this chart right now, I don't have it to show you all, so I'm just kind of explaining it to you. For the first time ever, both remote access compromise is the number one with a massive, it's 40% of all ransomware attacks in last quarter. But at the same time, phishing and social engineering, which would normally be tied somewhere pretty close for second place, is down in third place at something like, I'm estimating, 15%. It's actually software vulnerabilities that's in second place. And that kind of ties back to a little bit of what we talked about in the earlier slides, where we're talking about maybe not getting updates to open source solutions, or there isn't an update to an open source solution versus utilizing a commercial grade solution and so on. But this kind of data also kind of underpins what you're saying earlier, Anthony, about remote access isn't necessarily, always the thing that's involved with every attack. But in this case, we're seeing that last quarter, it was definitely the leading initial attack vector in ransomware attacks, according to one vendor. But I do find them to be rather reputable. Richard, I'm wondering from your perspective, how do I say this without bad mouthing like organizations? Because I'm not trying to. Are they aware of this problem? Do they know this is a problem? Do they know they're making it easy for the bad guys? I guess it's the only way I can put it.
Yeah, and there's a few ways to get in that we've experienced with clients, and it can be a sensitive point where we talk to customers about why are they looking for a solution. Presumably you have something in place, right? What happened? What do we need to be aware of about when we get into discussions about security? And security will always be the number one area that we are asked to address when we get inquiries or people take a trial of our software. So yeah, there is knowledge within the industries that RDP has been used, and some of the cases have been widely publicized. And again, it's not so much the technology; it's how it's been set up, right, initially, and whether that's been maintained over the years. We had instance where clients were talking about, well, they basically an actor was using RDP as like a jump server, right? They find that device that's internet exposed, and once they're in, they can move in the network, which Anthony will obviously he'll come across as well in his day to day. So the main thing is getting into a sensitive environment and then moving once you're in there through another way. So yeah, clients they're certainly much more aware about it because the industry has moved so much in the last 5-6 years to know these sort of things, and the knowledge is out there. But again, it depends on where the priority is for the IT leadership team coming in to look at that as well.
Which that's actually going to kind of tie into my next slide here, because I have a question for Anthony at the end of this slide. I want to talk about what organizations are doing about this issue with RDP. And for those of you watching, you look over on the right-hand side and you can see a chart here. It's basically the orgs that were using RDP. They were asked, what is your plan? What are you going to do with it? And I see the word depreciate, and it says deprecate. I should take that back. And deprecate, you have considering alternatives, no plans to change, and not sure. The only real good answer is the first one. We're going to get rid of it. We're going to remove it entirely. The other ones are like, considering alternatives is just considering alternatives. And then no plans is like, no, we're not going to do it. And we're not sure what we're going to. It's literally 66 something, like 60, what is that? 64% or something of organizations have basically, that's their answer. And they don't know what they're going to do with it. And so, Anthony, my question for you is, I think we all agree organizations know this is a problem. Richard, you even just kind of said so as well. Why do you think such a small percentage of organizations are actively addressing the problem?
I think it's the tough balancing act that organizations have. It's addressing, we might know, or we have security concerns, or we have something that we're worried about, especially once they read this report. I'm sure they'll be a lot more worried. But it's how do we now balance that with the way that we currently utilize these services? And we talk to them in the business as potentially operational debt, or you've got legacy technology, like you said, the hybrid environments that are the concerning areas, but that is what a lot of organizations are working with. And I think trying to address that, trying to be in the pile of maybe we're not going to deprecate, but we're going to harden is probably the worst used word in this sort of circumstance. But this isn't a case of we can just harden RDP, or we can just fix or protect our remote desktop. What we need to do is it's a program of work. It's a project in itself to renegotiate or re-architect the solution that they've currently got, as opposed to let's deprecate it and bring something in that's maybe vendor-led or something more specialized in the industry, because we just don't have the bandwidth to support that, but we still need to maintain our legacy technology. And I think don't want to do the two things. And I think it's hard to make that decision. It takes a strong CISO or CTO to come in and say, yes, it doesn't matter if maybe our business is hampered a small bit. We can't risk being attacked. That's a lot worse. But back to what you mentioned previously in the operational side of things, it just needs to work, and it needs to work now. And we can always fix security later, but we can't fix the business later, is what a lot of views are. So I think that's why it's bigger than what people think it is. So hence why they're just not addressing the problem, just going, don't know, we'll wing it and we'll hope that we're not popped, basically.
And Richard, I'm wondering if you kind of see it the same way in conversations with prospective customers. And you've already indicated that security is one of the primary conversations you're having. So we know that they are concerned about security. If we look at this future plans, and let's take the considering alternatives folks, the 26 whatever it is percent that I've got there on the screen, right? And they're thinking about it. Is some of the factors, well, we also have 7 other solutions, and we're, and it's going to be a major project. And what got me thinking was, Anthony, you said renegotiate. And I went like renegotiating a license is where my head went. And I'm glad you kind of said that, because it got me thinking down this question for you, Richard. It's like, does the idea of having multiple solutions and having to worry about licensing and it be a much bigger project to roll out, and does all that come into play here for organizations? So it's not just as easy. I'm assuming it's not just as easy as pick a solution and run with it. Do you find that that's the case?
Yeah, and sometimes it comes down to the industry that the customer's working in. Some of them are heavily regulated, right? So they will have to move pretty quick on reviewing what they have in place, because if they don't, there's going to be some regulations and compliance that comes back on them. And then you get some industries that don't have that over their heads, and they can kind of pick and choose when they do an upgrade or review options, and maybe that's around the pen test time. But yeah, certainly there's been a question that comes through that I'm kind of addressing inadvertently. But we work with government clients, but we also work with a number of banks. We worked with one recently in West Africa. We worked with another bank based in the Cayman Islands, and both motivations where we got to have something more secure in place. We are regulated, so if we don't do our jobs, there are consequences on quite a number of levels, right? So yeah, that group is, we have to do something, and we have the budget and the motivation to do that. Whereas the other part of the chart that you're looking at about, we might do something about it one day.
Maybe.
I mean, our policy is prevention is better than cure, right? Like, best to plan for it now and make some changes, rather than wait until you get popped, like Anthony said earlier.
Yeah, I agree here. Let's talk a little bit about the security controls within a given solution. We'll start over on the right-hand side, and it's just a chart showing this sort of danger zone where organizations have something like 1 to 5 security controls in place. And that could be a factor of what they've implemented, even though there might be 12 controls that are available or something, and more than likely, it's just whether or not the open source or the RDP solution in question doesn't have many security controls to put in place. And you can see that the organizations that are in that danger zone tend to have an incident rate. About half of them are having something like, it looks like 10 issues? I'm trying to make sure I can read this. It's very tiny on my screen. It's been a while since I looked at this chart here. The number of incidents there, it's it's the percentage there. 50%, a little over 50% of organizations in that danger zone have had incidents, versus those that have many more controls have had no incident. And it shows 100%, and that's the way the data showed. And if I look at the idea of the 1 to 5 controls, the bullet points there on the left aren't necessarily the controls. You do see things like organizations try to do things like a port change. That doesn't even matter, because you can just do port scanning, and they'll just basically try to do a test to see if it's a remote access port of some kind for various solutions. But the attack path itself is actually open, and it's when there's actually a number of security controls in place. Things like, I'll throw a couple out, and then Anthony, I'd love for you to even augment this a little bit here. But things like leveraging an identity provider, you have multi-factor authentication, there's role-based access, maybe not initially only allowing non-privileged access to the remotely accessed endpoint. I mean, things like that, just some very basic sets of security controls here. So maybe we could talk about the ones that you think might actually have an impact. Is it any of the ones I mentioned? Is it something else? Is it a combination therein? What are the ones that you recommend to clients if you were thinking specifically about remote access?
Yeah, of course I'm going to agree with you there, Nick. I already mentioned identity as that new security perimeter, and you brought up 3 identity controls, so you are in my good books this afternoon. And that MFA, having the conditional access, I think is really key. Having risk signals within the business. We're now seeing more and more organizations do identity via policy, like policy as code, as opposed to configuration, which is really helping them mandate that across their business or mandate it across tools and solutions. Having things like short-lived credentials, so ensuring that we've got no standing access. There's no admins that are sat in the background that are, oh, I need to do this for my day job for not 90 days of like on repeat schedules, but they only maybe access it once a month or so. So removing their standing access using additional tools to help with that identity perimeter. I think, especially as we're talking remote, it would be amiss to not talk about networks and the network layer. That's very key, especially now with people remote accessing across the internet, essentially, or across different environments. It's not just your server anymore. It's not your network that's hosted in your data center. This is now traversing all over the show. So how do we segment that traffic? How do we ensure that we've got different controls and different utilization, different points? Richard mentioned previously around people that have like infrastructure, or they might have a lot of OT. OT we see as the primary driver for remote access from the clients that I'm working with at the moment. And where are they on the network? Is it still flat, even though we need to access these highly operational, highly technical, and in the worst case scenarios, very concerning machines that can have severe consequences? Let's make sure they're separated so they haven't got any of the outbound connectivity that we don't want them to have. Everything should be terminating. Everything should be stopping at a gateway or a bastion host or something along those lines. How do we get that network in? I think once we do those 2 really key things, the identity and the network, we can then monitor, and we could go into a whole host of what we're looking for. I'm not going to list out every individual kind of SOC alert that you want to be having, but once we are doing some level of monitoring, we've then got a pretty good protection plan there. And I think just how long have we been talking now? Maybe 90 seconds. Listed a lot more than 5 controls that organizations can do, and I think they can do them fairly responsibly. Is probably a better way. I wouldn't say easily. It's always the hard thing. It's these things are simple, but it doesn't mean they're easy. But they can be responsibly implemented by organizations, and they will make a big difference.
I love that you mentioned operational technology. You said OT. And for those that don't know, that's operational technology, just because a lot of times we tend to think of remote access as I'm trying to access a Windows, a Mac, a Linux machine, something along those lines, as opposed to some other kind of device. And those devices, if they're accessible, can be leveraged. I mean, I go back to I want to say it was like 2010, which is a long time ago, but it's making the point that it happened back then. And you may even remember this story, Anthony. It was a casino in the UK, and someone accessed a fish tank temperature monitor. Do you remember this story? Someone accessed
No, not exactly.
It was remotely accessible to the internet, and someone hacked into that, and whatever OS was on it, maybe it wasn't Raspberry Pi. I don't think it was out that back then, but whatever it was, they hacked it and used that as their bridge to then gain access to the casino's network, and then stole data out of it through a temperature sensor for a fish tank. Ridiculousness. And yet, that's obviously not OT, but the whole point is, oh, well, that's a system that just manages this machinery. It doesn't matter if it's accessible, if it has access to a network, has access to the internet. There's the possibility of it still being leveraged, even if it's not even a full Windows machine, even if it's something else that's based off of, like a user Raspberry Pi as an example here. Do you see examples of that, Anthony, in the real world where something has access and has actually been leveraged by a threat actor?
Yeah, we have seen it. We're seeing it in the more of the remote industries. So you've got very legacy OT that maybe can't have as many security controls built into it. And if there's not network segmentation, then that is a decent route in. It's happening with farming devices. So you think it's kind of funny to think of a temperature sensor, but that's exactly what they've got out in various fields, on oil pipes. They've got all these small sensors that if they're on the same networks, that's going to be a very easy route in when they're using very old technology. We're talking Windows devices that haven't been patched for probably since 2010, since that attack first happened, and they're still sat there on these networks. So how do we remote into those appropriately? How do we secure that solution? And that is where people need to really think. And I think small OT is a concern for a hack. You've then got much greater OT. You've got these things that are in factories, in airports, they might just be trying to bring down that device, as opposed to taking down the network or the organization, and that's what we've also got to very much protect.
Awesome. And then Anthony, you're just thinking about this from a perspective of when you're talking to customers themselves. Does this seem relevant to you? Is this something where you have recommended security controls that you normally talk to customers about? I mean, do you have that conversation where we're making recommendations to them, or do they already know what they're looking for?
No, definitely the recommendations are coming in. We're consistently seeing those need to be done, and having those conversations with our clients of, okay, you might have the solution already and you brought us in to implement or to support on the rollout. What are we doing from a configuration perspective? And all those controls that we mentioned previously around that identity and that network layer, how are we doing that together? How are you implementing that from this side? We want to be doing configuration over code if we can, so eliminate that custom patching schedule that we're always worried about. And I think it looks the same depending on solution they're putting in practice, but the actual development or deployment is very different, whether you're doing it yourself and you're trying to manage all of that, or whether you've got someone or a solution that's going to come in almost out of the box and be able to give you that functionality that we are already recommending in the security controls.
And let's talk about one last aspect. We mentioned this already a little bit here, which is the idea of having multiple solutions in place. And I definitely wanted to make sure I had a slide on this specifically, because I think that's one of the biggest risks that exist, is just the disparity that might exist across solutions. We've somewhat, I'll use the word implied that the open source, RDP, they don't have a lot of built-in security controls, or don't necessarily have a lot of security controls built in here. But what you can see over on the right, those of you watching here, you can see organizations that have kind of 2 to 3 tools in place, remote access tools, so 2 to 3 different solutions for different purposes throughout an organization. They have they're largely okay. You can see about 2/3 of them have no incidents. 1/3 of them do have incidents. But then when you start to get to 4 or 5 different tools, you go past this tipping point where now it's over half of organizations have incidents there. And, Richard, I'm going to start with you. When you're talking to prospects, how many solutions do they have? Well, if you were to give just a put your finger up, see which way the wind's blowing. This is not an exhaustive or, any kind of statistically relevant answer here. But when you're talking to customers in general, it feels like they have how many solutions in general, or is there a range? What normally seems like you see out there?
There's usually a range. There's usually at least more than one, right? So some customers, unfortunately, just collect them over the years. Someone puts in budget to get something for a specific project that they're running, and the left hand's not talking to the right, and they don't know there's already an existing tool in the company that's being used for something very similar. So we sometimes get those occasions. There'll be other occasions where a different tool's been selected for a specific purpose. So a classic example in our world is, okay, you've got, I don't know, 1,000 managed devices in a network. We'd rather connect them on premise. We don't really want to go through a cloud or an internet service. And then you've got another part of the service desk, which is like, well, we need to support our customers when they're on the road. We need to support their mobile devices. So you end up essentially with 2 separate products to handle those 2 separate issues, without realizing that you might be able to do both with one solution. So yeah, they tend to collect them over the years, or there's a specific reason why one has been selected for a new project. Most of our conversations throughout we've got a pretty large customer base, and obviously with multiple tools in place, a lot of the interest we get from existing clients who have been with us for a number of years, and maybe they just got bought by another company, or they're going through a merger process and there's another entity or subsidiary coming through the door, and the IT department are like, okay, we got a plan for this merger, it's going to happen in 18 months. What do we do? Like, what tools they're going to bring across? What tools might they use from what we have? So you also get that scenario plays out as well, and they have to talk about either keeping both solutions or keeping 3 or 4 solutions, or they consolidate, and there's benefits in consolidating on a tool as well.
Just out of curiosity, what's the highest number of solutions you've ever heard a prospect have?
It's when the customers, they start counting their fingers, right? They're like, and it's like, okay, I get it. I get what's happening
And
here.
then-
So
okay, it's 7, 8, 9. It doesn't matter.
yeah, and by that point, it doesn't matter. It's like, okay, I get the sense of this.
And then Anthony, coming back to the security perspective on all this, um, how often? I think I already know. I know the answer, but the audience probably will know the answer when I ask the question as well. But I just want to hear from your perspective. How often do you have even if it's 2 or 3, if not 7, 8, 9, or 10, disparate remote access solutions, and them all have, let's call them the same or similar security controls, just the controls? We obviously know there's no way to uniformly like push out controls and configurations across different solutions, but just they have similar control sets. How often does that even happen?
Yeah, in terms of the control set available, almost all of the time, I would say. In terms of the control set implementation, almost never of the time. There's always one tool that's forgotten, or there's one that's less loved. There's one that only fits a very small purpose. So it's there's quite often a weak link per se in this, especially like you said, when we're counting on 2 hands, then we've got big problems. But there's always going to be, once the clients are then looking to their vendors and going, well, why do we not have this? Like, why do we not have MFA, or why are our logs not coming through, etc.? It's usually because it's just not been turned on, or it's not being configured, or they missed the latest update, or they didn't have their sales call that quarter, or something along those lines, that they've forgotten about this tool. It's been able to sit on the shelf while still being operational. But the actual facilities available are they're pretty common. They're pretty much there, or they're able to be done. They're just chosen not to.
Fair enough here. So let's go to the last slide that I've got here, and then we're gonna do a little bit of Q&A with you guys. I see a couple of questions have come in from a few folks here. And that is just the things that are going to enable security for remote access. And I had to put a couple things here that is somewhat of a summary, but also just forward thinking for all you that are watching of what you need to be thinking about when you're trying to make sure that your remote access is secure here. The fact that the free, the DIY, the open source type remote access here is going to introduce hidden costs. There's management costs. If you're having more than one, of course, there's hidden risks. We talked about that. We kind of demonstrated that with some of the industry data here. The idea of consolidating maybe solutions here would create more visibility if you had one solution, as well as a stronger level of security, to the points that both Richard and Anthony were making on the last slide, of just the disparity. That's my word, but the disparity of solutions and the way that they implement controls. There's no uniform way to do it. And so having visibility across all your solutions, I like that you said one was less loved, Anthony. And that is, if we at least knew it existed, it would get us as much love. And so there's a need for visibility to what solutions you do have. If not, even deeper than that, what are the security configurations of each of the solutions here? If not, going deeper than that, having a consolidation of solutions down to 1 or 2 or some smaller number here. And then the idea of having multiple layered security controls is what's going to stop the attack. Back to my sort of joking marketing campaign of like, stop making it easy. Well, if we leverage MFA, and if we utilize an identity store, and if we're putting in some kind of role-based access, and that makes it materially more difficult for the threat actor, because they have an objective in mind. They're trying to gain access. They're trying to gain privilege. They're trying to move laterally. They're trying to discover as much as they possibly can. And then they're trying to do whatever it is at the end they're trying to do, whether it's to exfiltrate data, or they're trying to hold something for ransom, or whatever the goal is. That's what they're trying to do here. Anthony, sort of maybe some final thoughts here. Any of these recommendations stand out? Is there something you'd add to this just so that they ensure security and remote access for our audience?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't be doing my job title or my role any justice if I didn't say it's going to be the bottom one. We're going to be talking about security controls. We want preventative measures. We don't want as much protective. We obviously want to protect our infrastructure, but we want to prevent the attack from happening in the first place. I think tools are really important. They really do matter. They are very functional. We wouldn't be able to architect the solutions that we do without them. But how they are implemented or configured almost matters more. Like I said on the previous slide, a lot of solutions do a lot of the similar things, but they're not always effectively implemented in that right way. If we can get that technology implementation right, if we can get those security controls, if we can layer them together, then we'll make it a lot easier on ourselves to then consolidate in the future, to then try and remove some of our DIY and take off some of the operational burden of our teams and some of that functional of, we are now software developers of this service and this tool, as opposed to doing our day-to-day job because we're having to kind of bootstrap something else when we didn't really need to, because we could have implemented a tool effectively. But I think it's that implement effectively is going to be the key. It's like architect strongly.
Excellent. And then Richard, we don't have any like demo here or any massive pitch. So I thought just maybe the last question to ask you is, would you just talk a little bit about RealVNC and why it stands out from a security perspective as a viable remote access solution for the audience?
Yeah, sure. And again, appreciate for having me on today. And I'll just take a couple of minutes on this point. So for any existing customers on the call, they all know we've been around in this space for over 20 years now. So we've got 20 years experience of doing this, adapting the product, meeting security concerns that we've done day in, day out. So we've got that rich history behind us. When you're looking for a tool, or if you're reviewing a remote access screen sharing tool, be rigorous with your scrutiny of security measures and what their posture is in the market. We're happy to provide some independent analysis of our tool and where we score highly from a security perspective. So when you're considering options, please be rigorous with your investigations and ask the vendor or the product that you're considering for, evidence of what they can provide in with their security claims, and that's really important, right? And we'll go through that process, and our CIO does that all the time, where we're asked to present what we have from a security front. And the other point to mention about RealVNC, so we talk a lot about OT environments. We work a lot with manufacturing. We work a lot with help desks. So the main point with what our offering is, it's a hybrid solution, right? So we offer an on-prem licensing option. Nothing has to touch the internet. It can be in a closed network, and we get a lot of interest on that basis, right? That people, from a regulatory point of view, can't go on the internet for connections. But we also have an internet connectivity module. It's our cloud services, which operate in a secure fashion. It's all been signed off internally for that use, and we've had that model since 2016. So again, 10 years in the cloud space and over 20 years in providing an offline license key. So if you're looking for a hybrid solution, all customers are different. We have that to assist customers. And the very last thing is, and we haven't really talked about it too much, is ensuring that you can audit connections that are coming into your network, right? So we have that ability. We recently released an on-premise management console last year. So if you're operating in an on-premise environment, so using effectively an offline license key, you can still audit events. We'll present all those in a console that you provide. So we have that for security scrutiny as well.
Excellent. And then I thought we might go ahead and just put up this sort of next step slide. And then there's a couple of questions that have come into the Q&A box that we'll answer. But do you want to just kind of cover this real quick? What's the next step for the audience if they're interested?
Yeah, of course. So the QR code, to go ahead and scan that. I'm available on LinkedIn. If you go on our website and go to the Contact Us page, there is a box you can fit in there as well. We do have a live chat service running as well. So if you've got quick questions, you can go through there as well. So there's a number of different ways that you can come through. But yeah, happy to answer any questions if you want to scan the QR code.
Awesome. And we'll leave this slide up here while we just cover. I did see a question came in from Andy, and I thought this is sort of an interesting question. And I'm going to pose it to each of you sort of maybe separately. The question is, should government and regulators mandate some minimum security criteria for remote access? I think we all would just go, yes. Okay, next question. Yeah, but let's talk about this a little more. So one is maybe Anthony, from your perspective, answer the question. You can say yes, they should, or for both of you, do you know of any examples where it is being mandated, where it's going that deep? We tend to find that regulations and control sets tend to be very generic because they don't know which applications being used. They don't know, what vendor or what platform. And it's trying to be actually vendor agnostic and platform agnostic. And so they write them more broadly, if you will. But Anthony, I'll start with you. What's your thought on that in terms of, should they, and do you know of any examples, maybe I'm adding this part in, where they are?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. They should be. We should have stronger enforcement of these types of recommendations for security tooling. We have a lot of recommendations. You'll see a lot of markers out there in the industry. A lot of them are even charity organizations that are running these. They're not profits, and they are the strongest kind of recommendation of security controls that we want to be implementing. But the the mandation is very difficult because, like you said, every architecture is different. Every organization has different types of services. They have different technologies in place. So mandating is tough to do. I think the recommendations are, although high level and loose per se, they're certainly there in and around the RDP or like the remote access also. So a lot of the things that we've mentioned today haven't been inherent software security for remote access. They've been around the perimeter of it, of how do we secure everything that goes around the outside. And those sort of recommendations or mitigations are there. We're seeing a lot more come out in the UK specifically from the NCSC. They're doing a lot more recommendations now for their government organizations of how to do not necessarily specific technology per se, but more of that high level of how do we now mandate that everybody is on MFA, and what are the additional considerations that we need to have if they can't implement MFA for whatever reason, and if there's some type of 2FA certificate based or different type of authentication mechanism. Those recommendations are coming out. They're just not mandated as much as we would love them to be, so we didn't have a wild west of tools. We do have a lot of things that we can follow and you can reference back and forth, and there's cyber assessment frameworks in pretty much every industry now, it seems, that you need to be ticking the box for. So you also need to be evidencing that you're implementing the right things. So I think that's movement in the right direction.
Yeah, I was going to actually touch on that with the cyber insurance side, because I was thinking those folks have a monetary interest in making sure that their clients have really good controls in place, because they don't want to pay out they want to pay the claim. And so there's an organization, Coalition Insurance, that I've seen some number of reports for over the years. They handle cyber insurance, and they're some of their best practices to minimize remote access vulnerabilities. And they do state that these are some of the requirements they have as well: is MFA, encryption, password strength, software updates, access management. They mentioned security training, which sounds more like security awareness trainings. They mentioned phishing attempts and things like that, which ties, of course, back to things like credential harvesting attacks and whatnot. And then frequent risk assessments, and they suggest at least once a quarter. So kind of interesting there. Richard, anything you'd add on from the RealVNC side around this question of whether or not regulators and government should actually implement some minimum security criteria?
Yeah, a lot of it is driven by the market. So in the US, we have a lot of customers in the US. In the healthcare sector, we've just had our HIPAA compliance signed off for RealVNC tail end of last year. So we kind of, we move to the market about what the requests are from a specific industry. So I think the more markets talk about security and what they need to have in place, vendors and products have to move with that as well, right? So it's somewhat reactionary, but also we try and be proactive with the measures that we take from a security perspective. So HIPAA compliance is the latest thing that we have signed off, and that complements our ISO 27001 certs as well.
Excellent there. And then one other, it's more of a commentary, came in from Jeffrey. Jeffrey, I mentioned this, even though I think this is more of a request for RealVNC internally, but I wanted to make sure we just kind of covered it a little bit here, so we weren't ignoring your request. And Richard, this is probably more for you, just more like an FYI. But Jeffrey is having some challenges implementing Duo 2FA with RealVNC Enterprise, and he goes through some detail here about what he's going through in order to get it. But he did mention at the end he'd enjoy watching a more technical webinar about implementing and optimizing security in RealVNC. So that might be something to add into the, talk to the powers that be and make that some kind of really good tool set for the both the sales process, maybe even beforehand as well as maybe after. So I just want to make sure we touch on that, so Jeffrey knew we care and that weren't just like not gonna read that guy's comment, because you guys have a bit of a challenge. I think it's important. So yeah.
Well, I mean, it's great that you're actually implementing the Duo as well, right? Think about security and tightening things up. So I'm happy to pick it off offline, and we can pick it up with Jeffrey and help out with that.
Very good. Anthony, Richard, thank you both for joining me today. I think this was a really good discussion. We did obviously only got 1 or 2 questions here from the audience, but that's okay. And we've got about 2 minutes left, so we're going to get out of here right on time. For those of you watching, thanks a lot for watching. Again, if you're maybe typing a question right now and we're not able to get to it, someone from RealVNC will reach out to you directly and make sure you get your question answered. Jeffrey, that of course already applies to you. And with that, thanks a lot for attending today's webinar, and we'll catch you on the next one. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Richard. Bye.
Thank you.